All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Super pumped to be doing this on a Monday to start the week off right. It's been a little bit since the last episode, which was by design. I enjoyed having a little bit of time off. I got caught up on some reading, and now we're back into the swing of things. And I'm very happy to start it up again with my guest today. Her trilogy is flying very under the radar. Book three comes out in 2 days, I believe, on the 12th. I am more than a quarter of the way, but less than halfway through it. And from all the reviews I've seen so far from very trusted people, I saw Esme reviewed it and a couple others, and heaps of praise, and I could see why. So without any further ado, bringing her to the stage now, NC Scrimgeour, who I pronounced right, I double checked.
Yeah. Hello, thanks so much for having me. Really
Uh,
stoked to be here. And like I
Thank
said, on a
you.
Monday night, it gets the week off to a good start. So
A good start, especially, well, you have it in I guess it's the evening now by you, but for me, this is smack in the middle of the workday, and I love doing this because I get to talk to such cool people and talented authors like yourself, and then it really makes those last couple hours of work fly by. So thank you for being in the UK and helping me break up my workday.
yeah, no problem.
So just to get it started first, I'm showing the cover for the new book and then going back to book one.
Yeah.
But every cover so far is stunning. Uh, really beautiful work. Can you give some insight into the creative process to getting what you want and what you picture? You do such a good job descriptively writing that this is like what I see when reading your book. So how did the process go from the writing to bringing it to life like that?
Yeah, I guess I always wanted the kind of cover that was going to really give the sort of atmosphere of the book. It doesn't really need to capture like a certain scene or a certain character or anything. For me, it's more important that you see the cover, you kind of know what sort of mood, what kind of vibe you're going to get. So that's kind of, I guess, where I start off with. And then just brief it all in. So it was Mibble Art that did the covers for all three books, and they're really good. They kind of set out just different questions that you sort of fill in, give your ideas, and then they come with their ideas as well. So kind of a collaborative process. But I feel the more precise you can be with your own sort of vision about what you want, then it goes quite smoothly. It'll coming together. So there's definitely always going to be a sort of sea theme across all three books, and definitely that kind of sort of stormy, dark atmosphere as well, which I think they did an amazing job at sort of bringing that to life. So especially with book three, I feel it just kind of goes up a level as well with each book. And I was like, yeah, throw lightning in there, throw in water spouts, make the ships go on fire. Like, let's just really crank it up a notch for book three. So
Yeah, it's at the end of the trilogy. You might as well go all out on it.
exactly, yeah.
I was such a beginner to this whole scene that with the first couple of people I asked, they all said, I use my art. And I was like, this person must be so busy before realizing it was a company. But they do a really good job.
It's based out of Ukraine, yeah.
It's very well done. And now I'm going back to book one because for the people who haven't started reading this yet, first off, again, I'm just going to mention the cover because this was one where I think last year it's like a new thing where every year on my birthday, I'm like, I'm going to buy indie books. That's my thing. And I saw yours last year. That was actually when I bought it. And so the cover drew me in instantly, and that was an immediate purchase. But can you just give a little bit of a background on the genesis of the story, like how you kind of came up with it for book one?
Yeah, so I always had wanted to write a sort of fantasy book that was about Scottish folklore. Obviously, being from Scotland myself, I think Scottish folklore and Scottish mythology are maybe not as widely known and widespread in fantasy as your kind of some of the sort of usual creatures and monsters and everything that's in there. So I really wanted to take something that was from sort of my country's folklore and mythology, and then just have a kind of play about with that and sort of build more kind of lore and more world building around that and make it into something that kind of builds on the original myth, but then is also something new as well. So that was just really, really fun for me getting to dive into that. And it mostly focuses all around the Selkie myth. So for anyone that doesn't know, a Selkie is a seal in the water, and then when they come onto land, they can obviously shed their pelt and kind of blend in and become human. So quite often in the myth, what happens is somebody steals the Selkie's pelt when they're on land, and then that prevents them from returning to the water. And it's generally quite a tragic, sort of sad story that unfolds. So I kind of wanted to take that myth, but then give the Selkies a little bit more agency. So they tend to get pretty violent if their pelts are threatened, and then that kind of sets up the whole conflict between them and the humans. And that's sort of where the story then goes.
Mm-hmm. It was very interesting because the Scottish folklore was one of the big draw-in points for me, where I thought it sounded very interesting, but I liked going in not knowing as much about it. Like when I first started reading about the Selkie myth and everything like that, I thought that was all like an original idea. And then as it went on, I was like, this is wild. And it took a little bit to get a grasp on it and put all the pieces together. But I feel like you did such a great job of taking from your country's folklore and everything like that and putting it into a kind of updated age where, it's the pirate the ships, there's different cities going on, there's political stuff going on very much beneath the surface, and it really kind of transcended the folklore and brought it into like a way that we see all the time. So I thought you did a really good job of that. What made you decide to go with that type of backstory where, the main character, Isla, gets back after sailing for, I think, 7 or 8 years and has a letter waiting for her? But what made you want to go that route as the jump off point to lead into the story?
Yeah, I think I always want to make my main characters have a little bit of like experience in the world. I not so much writing sort of young adult or that kind of crossover fiction where it's like kind of coming of age. So I wanted her to already have that bit of experience. She's not necessarily battle hardened, but she's been through stuff. So I think that then makes it kind of gives a little bit more for her to go on as the story goes on. And then I just really like the idea of this kind of homecoming and coming back to find things changed but the same, and not really knowing where then she sort of fits into that. And one of my favorite things about writing this book was the different relationships she has with the people she comes back to, particularly her brother, which was probably the most fun one to write. Also difficult because they have a very strained relationship, but yeah, the idea of coming back to some place after being away for so long and realizing that you can't sort of slot back into that own life and there are tensions there was just a really interesting dynamic that I thought was fun to explore.
Yeah, I loved it, especially like the way that you said where she's not battle hardened. It didn't come off as like she's life worn and gets back and it's like, oh, I'm back here, this is horrible. But it was very important, and I feel like you did a great job where you could kind of piece together the things that she's experienced and that she's earned what she is so far in her life. It wasn't every once in a while you see a book or something and the main character goes away for a month and comes back as like a master swordsman or something like that. And you're like, no, like it's just not believable. I feel like the way you wrote this book, the characters are the most believable part of it. I thought the writing itself, which we'll get into, was spectacular, but I feel like the very high point of the series, not just this book, was the characters and their relationships. How'd you go about going into such detailed relationships between the characters, and did you kind of know how you wanted that to be when you started off writing? Was this more of an outline or kind of just I'm going for it and what happens?
I think for me, like I always think I'm more of a character-driven writer than a plot driven writer. I mean, I like having a good story, and I'll probably, when I'm planning a book, I'll have a certain idea in mind that I want to explore, but then the characters are something that come to me like quite early on in the process, and then what I want to do with them then often shapes what I want to do with the plot. So I kind of have the vague sort of archetypes, I suppose, of characters. So like Isla was obviously being the main character. She was like fleshed out quite early on, and I knew like pretty much from the start that I wanted that kind of tension, that relationship with her brother, to be quite, you know, painful, something that you can kind of prod and sort of explore there. So that made, yeah, writing those two, I had an idea of where I wanted to go, and I think the more you write, the more they kind of end up clashing and coming into conflict, and it just kind of, it builds from there. So I always think I have at least a rough idea of where I want a character's sort of journey or kind of motivations to take them. But then it's when you actually start writing that then becomes sort of more fleshed out. And sometimes it ends up going in a bit of a different direction than like you first anticipate. But I think, yeah, having that sort of core idea in mind before I start is always helpful.
Question coming in from the chat. It's been on the TBR forever, but do you think there will be any audio versions at any point?
I would love to. I would really, really love to. So I did audiobooks for my sci-fi trilogy and the Way Stations trilogy, which, like the narrator, Jared Kezia, did an absolutely amazing job. It is quite a big upfront sort of investment to do that. So I've not done it with Sea of Souls trilogy yet, but is something that I would very much like to do. So we'll see how that pans out. But if I can, I will.
On the docket, we'll revisit down the line.
Yeah.
It's got to be pretty promising, though, that I think I saw you post on social media the other day that the pre-orders for book 3 are what book 1 sold in like 2 months or something like that.
Yeah. So yeah, the amount of pre-orders for book 3 is higher than, or almost higher than, the entire first month sales of book 2. So it's just, I feel like it's been a really kind of slow burner of a trilogy. It's like, maybe like you said earlier, it's like kind of gone under the radar. But even just in the past couple of weeks, couple of months, I felt like even I've heard more about it, and people can talk about it, especially with the kind of excitement with book 3 coming out, and that's been reflected in more people pre-ordering it and more people picking up the first 2 books as well. Even in the past couple of weeks or so, it's been really positive. So I'm, as an author, that's all you can really hope for, is seeing those numbers go up and seeing it reach more people. So yeah, I'm super excited about Wednesday.
Yeah, that's awesome. I feel like I came in so fresh to this type of stuff that I never realized how complicated things were behind the scenes. Like, I didn't realize that even if book 1 is amazing, it's hard to keep people involved for book 2 and book 3, and especially to not only keep them involved, but to hear that you exceeded that is really awesome. In that indie scene that you're in, how do you go about staying? You do a great job on like TikTok and Instagram Reels, like keeping people up to date with your writing process. But was that something that you kind of had to step outside your comfort zone and do, or do you just turn the camera on and you're like, whatever happens, happens? Like, I'm winging it; it'll turn out good.
Yeah, it's definitely been a bit of a learning process. When I was first publishing the Way Stations trilogy, or certainly writing it, I wasn't even on really social media. I mean, I had kind of personal accounts, but I wasn't really doing book stuff at all. And then, yeah, it's only really, I suppose, maybe in the past few years that I've tried to make more of a concentrated effort on that. And again, I never used to do video stuff at all. It would always just be like photos of my books or photos of me with my books or whatever. It's not really until kind of TikTok started sort of becoming more of a thing, and I'm like, well, I'll give it a try, see how it goes. So yeah, it's still, I would definitely say it is out of the comfort zone a little bit, but you almost just sort of forget to be self-conscious. And especially with TikTok, it's like very unserious. Like, you don't really need to be hugely polished or professional. It's just sort of a bit of a laugh in the end. And I try not to like let it take up too much of my time. So I might set aside an hour or 2 at the weekend. I'll record enough for 5 videos and then post them through Monday through Friday, and then that's it done. So I'm trying not to let it kind of seep into my day-to-day, like constantly like filming or constantly checking it and stuff. So I do it in little blocks and then see how it goes, and then by the time it's posted, people like it or they don't. So we'll see.
That's really smart to just have it all recorded and then just clip it and post it out, so you don't have to worry about it. It's also very refreshing to hear that you as an author are saying, oh, it's just like silliness, it's a fun time and everything, because I feel like a lot of the people like that I see on there, it's very serious. And like I like came up with an idea or two for like a reel, and I'll message someone and be like, what do you think about this? And the feedback is like, people are gonna think you're making fun of them. And it's like, but it's not, it's not serious. So to hear you say it is just like, all right, thank God. Like it's nice to have hear that.
I think I used to think I had to take it more seriously than I was, but I mean, in my head, like, social media is only like a part of what I do to promote my books. It's not the be all and end all. So when I started seeing it as more of something fun to do rather than something like a job that I had to do to sell books, I think that just made me feel a bit more natural and a bit more relaxed about it. It's just, it's just something fun. And at the end of the day, if I'm not having fun doing it, then it's really a waste of my time, and it's not really going to come across well to anyone else. So if it ever stops being fun, then I'll stop doing it. So
yeah, that's a very good way of looking at things. I wanted to ask also, because I feel like this is one of the reasons that I connected so much with this book, but how would you describe the genre of it? Like the way that we talk about the folklore and all that type of stuff, one of the biggest aspects of the book is kind of like the slow burn romance under it. But as an outsider to the genre, I don't think this would be considered a romantasy, right? Like
yeah, no, I agree. I think there's probably some romantasy readers that would enjoy it for that aspect, but certainly I think I would hesitate to categorize it in that way myself, particularly because a lot of the aspects of the book out with the romance are not really what you'd expect. So I've talked about this before, but a lot of romantasy is like written in first person. This is third person. Quite often the main female character is a bit younger, whereas Isla's been out in the world for a while. So there's quite a few differences. I mean, generalizing here, but yeah, there is a kind of romance subplot in there as well. I kind of describe it as a subplot because I think it enhances the story, but you could take that out, and I think the core of the story is kind of unchanged. So I don't think it's the stories about the romance, but that's just a kind of one of many relationships that Isla has that impact her character. And I would probably argue that the relationship she has with her brother and with Avi are every bit as important, if not more important, than the romance. So it's kind of, I suppose, one aspect of her character and her relationships.
I feel like that's why I loved this series so much, and I've noticed it with one or two other ones as I read, and I feel like it's a testament to your strengths as a writer, where the romance, like even when the romance comes up, it's so tastefully done and well done, and it works to the story that it doesn't feel like damsel in distressy or like a romance subplot or not like plot line, and then being like, and there's the dragon, and you're like, oh yeah, it's a fantasy book too. Like it's very tastefully done, and like you said, it contributes to the story. But if even you peeled back on that a little bit, her relationships with her brother, with even her father down the line, with all these other people, it's just as engaging as that subplot. So I feel like that's a very well done aspect of the story. And similar to how I mentioned a little bit ago, I feel like the characters are kind of the highlight of the story for me and the relationships that she has with them. How did you go about building those relationships and keeping it very unique to each one of them? Because book one is, just through her POV, but by the time we go to book two, an additional one gets added, who I'll talk about in a little bit. But the way that you layered all of the different kind of lines that come from her to all the other characters, it felt so fleshed out and well done that you were experiencing the positives, the negatives, the heartbreaks, everything along with her. So how did you go about doing that and keeping it so engaging?
Yeah, I mean, I think having characters sort of fully fleshed out in their own rights as individuals is makes that work. So I'm not just writing them through the lens of their relationship with Isla. They need to be sort of fully formed, fully realized characters in their own right, with their own goals, with their own motivations, with their own kind of flaws and selfishness and whatever it might be. And then it's kind of how they then move through the world in their own individual way that then impacts their relationship with Isla, the main character. So I would never like want to write a character as a kind of like plot device, for want of a better word, just for a way to further Isla or to further her characterization or her moving through the plot. It's like they're all sort of individual pieces that then, just by nature of them being sort of, well, hopefully well-rounded and interesting, that makes their relationships and how they interact interesting as well.
And do you have any siblings by any chance? Because it felt very
so this comes
very well done between them.
I do. It's funny. I have a younger sister, and I've seen a couple of like comments about the relationship between the main character and her brother being like, oh, you know, this doesn't feel like fiction, like that this is drawn from somewhere. But me and my sister get on so well. Like, we're really supportive of each other, and she kind of is in her own creative stuff as well. She's really into kind of music and photography and stuff, so she kind of gets what the whole writing process is like. So yeah, our sibling relationship is thankfully nothing like Lachlan and Isla's, so feel very fortunate for that.
No, that's awesome. But it was definitely that type of thing where you could tell, and I feel like that led its strengths to the story, where it was like, this is, you know, like you said, your relationship isn't bad, thank goodness, but you could tell the way that those two feel about each other and the emotions that go into it. It comes from a personal place where it's like, I have a sibling, I know how I would act if this was going on, and it kind of carried over. So that definitely seeped through. Was there anything else personal that, without getting too personal, I just mean, what inspirations did you take to put into the story to make it so engaging?
Yeah, it's quite hard. I don't tend to like get too sort of personal with my stories, because I find so much of it just comes from like imagination and like thinking about new characters or new places and wanting just creatively to explore that. So I mean, obviously, like, you always draw on your own experiences, but for me, the kind of most exciting thing about writing is getting that initial sort of spark and idea, and then just kind of burrowing and digging deeper and finding ways to sort of explore that. So like I said, my main inspiration was the Selkie myth, and I sort of used that as a sort of foundation. But then, all the stuff about if they lose their pelt, they like their bodies literally start to wither away and become kind of salt and return to the sea. Like, that's not in the original Selkie myth, so that was something that I kind of made up and wanted to explore. And with the wraiths as well, like if a Selkie loses their pelt and they become one of the wraiths, like, again, that was something new. So yeah, really about taking the foundation of the myth and then just using that as a platform to kind of like have a playground and, you know, explore and have fun.
That's so interesting, because I did not know. Like I said, wasn't familiar with the myth to start with, and then I just assumed the wraiths were part of it. So hearing that now is even cooler, because I didn't know that. I didn't want to start reading this story and then instantly go on Google and be like, tell me this whole myth. So like, I tried to avoid it, but that is so cool to hear that, like, those were the twists and the different things that you came up with to add onto the myth. Because that almost took it from like a adventure-y story and like you know, with a sibling rivalry. There's all of those type of things to it, but adding those aspects to that myth almost added like a horror aspect to it. And when you start to see, like, as they're walking around or talking, and you read that the mists are rolling in, it was such a sense of foreboding. So that's really cool. I'm gonna gush on that for a second, because I did not know that. if you had to add anything else, Scottish myth-wise, what interests you in that realm of things?
Well, I kind of started off, it was really just about the Selkies, and then I added a couple of other ones in. So there's the Kelpies, which are the water horses. So they're like kind of a separate myth in their own right, but I wanted to kind of tie them in. So the Kelpies in this are kind of the ghost horses that the Selkies kind of ride. So that was a fun way to tie in. And then obviously because it's like set in the sea, I kind of added in some stuff about like sea serpents, which then led me down into a rabbit hole that I did not know that apparently this huge big Scottish sea serpent exists in folklore called the Kieran Cruin, and it's like, apparently just the most gigantic sea serpent there ever was. So that was something new for me that I kind of went and discovered, and then I was like, right, I've got to find a way to incorporate that somehow. So it was quite fun, just the more sort of research I did into it, just finding little different bits and pieces to draw from and put into the books.
Very cool. Yeah, like I said, I'm not even going to get into it again. Was not familiar with it, but hearing all of these things, and none of it felt shoehorned in, where it was like, this is kind of like cool, but not needed. Like every aspect that was in there was very well done, and it's very interesting to hear the myths that have been around for centuries and generations, and then it's like I'm going to add another little twist or two onto it and kind of like enhance it while also keeping it unique to your country's heritage is really cool to hear. One of the biggest, not twists, but one of the biggest additions, I'm going to say, to book 2, which I was trying to pull the cover up and I realized I was using a mouse, which is not connected to this laptop. This is the cover for book 2, Myths of Memory. And like we were talking about before, the different characters, how it went from book 1, which was just Isla's POV, to book 2, where we get Darce, who, in my opinion, is one of the best characters of this series. What made you want to add in an additional POV to the story, and what made you pick him to put there?
It was kind of less of a want and more at the end of Sea of Souls, I like separated them and realised that, well, if I don't have a point of view back on the island in the city, we're going to get absolutely no perspective about what's happening there. So it was more of I suppose, a logistical choice, but also led to being really, really fun to explore. And I picked Darce because of that kind of the romance subplot going on between him and Isla. I think that he was probably the best vehicle to kind of explore that separation, but also his relationship. He has his own relationship with her brother as well, which was really, really fun to see those two together more without Isla, and explore how their relationship also kind of strained with her coming back, and the ways that they're trying to then sort of mend it, and sort of become sort of friends again, even though there's still this tension of Isla between the two of them. So I thought I knew I needed one character back on the island, and I just thought Darce would be the best one to explore that.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I thought it was very cool also that he is, in book 1, he's their sword master, kind of teaching them on their family's island, like how to, oh my God, I stuttered. Yeah, the sword master. I'm just going to go with that word for now. But it was a very cool choice because while she was gone, like you said, they're rebuilding their relationship with Darce and her brother. And it was very cool because it wasn't shoehorned in where it was like, now I'm going to start a whole new relationship with you. It had backstory built into it already, which made it very relatable and fun to see how they built their relationship up from scratch again. Because I try to avoid spoilers, which is why you see my brain thinking of how I can talk about something without spoiling it. But one of the coolest aspects of book 2 was the branching out of the world, because we kind of only get to see, the familial island and then the city that they go to in book 1. But book 2, Isla's off on a ship, and while they're still starting in the city, how did you go about getting more complex in the world building, but also doing such a great job of keeping the characters grounded in their own kind of turmoil that they have going on.
Yeah, I knew at the end of book one, like you said, it was quite contained. A lot of the action either takes place on the family estate or in the capital city, so there's not that much you see of the wider world. But I knew right from the start in book two I wanted to explore the kind of Selkie world much more, because we've met Selkies in book one, but we've only met them then coming into like the human world, whereas book two was a chance for then us to go into the Selkie world, and that just was like a whole new thing to explore. So that was really fun, getting to write about, out in the islands, out in the open waters, on the ships, like you said, and definitely taking it more, widening the world, as you said, and getting a little bit more perspective on that. And then with regards to kind of keeping the characters grounded, I think it's sort of similar to what I said before, just like as long as the characters have their own individual goals and motivation, and it feels like they're serving what they want, not serving what like the author wants, then I think that's how you feel. They feel more organic and more real then.
And again, I am not going to get into any spoilers, but this, as far as the book, it's so hard. It's so hard.
Because I do like a twist.
Yeah, I know, and they're all so good. And I'm not going to spoiler anything. But as far as book twos go, this was about as far away from, middle book syndrome as could be. This felt like not a gigantic step up from book one, which I really liked, but a step up nonetheless because of the betrayals and the twists that's going on to it. It added a lot more of a dynamic, especially when we start getting into kind of the lineage of the people that are getting involved in it. But one of the biggest aspects of it was kind of finding out more of the Grand Admiral, and that's all I'm referring to him as. But how did you go about taking that story and kind of keeping it below the surface? That's my C joke. For as long as you did, without kind of spoiling anything along the way. Like when there were twists and turns regarding his character, blown away. And it took me by surprise. I feel like I'm much more of an engrossed reader where I read and get so sucked in that I miss little breadcrumbs along the way. So when something like that happens, I'm like, holy shit. But did you have that planned out at the start of book one, or was that something where as you started writing book two, it was, okay, we're going to go this route with it?
Yeah. So in like the very early sort of planning stages, he was more just quite a separate character. Like, again, I'm not going to try and avoid going into spoilers here, but he wasn't as connected, I would say, as he turns out to be in these final books. He was more kind of like that sort of aloof villain who's kind of a bit out of the way. But yeah, I just felt like there needed to be more of a kind of emotional connection, something that was kind of driving his presence there more. And yeah, I think there's a real kind of sort of tragedy, I suppose, to his story. But then that's almost no excuse for how absolutely terrible a person he becomes. And there's something, sounds quite sadistic, but there's something really fun about writing someone who is just totally makes every wrong decision and picks the nastiest, most horrible option at every turn, quite willfully. You wouldn't want to know them in real life, but in terms of writing a book and having someone like him as an antagonist, is really good fun. So it was like when I was writing book one or kind of into the more sort of detailed planning stages, that's when he as a character and his relationship with the other characters in the book kind of sort of conceptualized a bit more. And then as we got into book two, I had quite a clear idea about where that journey was going to go. And obviously it kind of continues on as well to book three. He's kind of that thread that runs through it all, is the cause of quite a lot of the pain and conflict in all three books. And yeah, hopefully, again, no spoilers, but hopefully people see how that pays off in book 3.
Yeah, it was so well done that, like I said, I didn't see a lot of them coming, and going back almost to like a horror aspect of things. Like as I was reading book 2, I don't know if you saw. Have you ever seen Terminator 2?
Yeah.
You know, like the liquid metal guy, like the villain of that, how he keeps getting shot and keeps getting blown up, and you're like, he got him, and then he reforms, and you're like, oh my god. Like that's what it felt like reading this, where every time I was like, okay, I could take a breath. It was like a page later and something happened and the threat came back and it was like, oh, gee, like what is going to it take to get rid of this person?
Yeah, and you just can't see a way out.
Yeah, there was no way of getting rid of him. You know, I'm not done with book 3, so we don't have to worry about spoilers so far. But as far as taking inspiration for things like that, like how I just mentioned Terminator 2, are you kind of like are you a big movie person or shows, anything like that, where you think it can kind of almost be like a little bit of, not an influence, because I'm not saying you took influence from Terminator 2 for this, but like what do you like to do in, you know, your spare time where it would kind of connect to something like this?
It's funny going back to talking about book 2 and not wanting it to be that middle book syndrome. That's something like I've always been very, very conscious about when I'm writing. As a reader, I don't like when I get to a book 2 and I just feel like you're kind of treading water until you get to book 3. So every time I've written a book 2, it was the same for Way Stations as well. I've almost made a conscious decision that I want this book to be kind of bigger than book 1. I want it to have more action, and I want it to have something that's going to like be a gut punch or sucker punch or whatever. And as cliche it sounds, I think a lot of that comes from being a big Star Wars fan and absolutely loving Empire Strikes Back, because I think as a sort of example of how to do a second installment right, I think that pretty much ticks every box you could hope for. So just in terms of like thinking about how to structure a book 2 and what kind of emotional kind of touch points you want people to experience when going through a book 2, and leave it satisfying in its own right, but also make you really, really excited for book 3. I would say that's an influence in terms of the overall kind of structure and feeling of a second installment that I think is a good thing to emulate. So.
Yeah. It's actually very funny because Empire was what I was going to reference, but I don't want to tread too closely to things in book 2. So I was like, pivot. That was exactly where I was going to go. It's very funny to hear, but that's like, and you're right, because it kind of is like that gold standard of sequels where, you know, it builds upon the first one and doesn't let you breathe, leading into the third, which is really what this one did. And it kind of goes back to like the way you mentioned it, where having Darce as a second POV was more of like a necessity, but the things that he had to deal with, which again I thought was very cool, and I'm going to ask, was is the whole Sentinel idea part of the Selkie folklore, or is that also an original concept?
That's completely just out my head. Yeah, that's something completely different. Yeah, so that's not got any basis in sort of Scottish folklore. I suppose I wanted a kind of magical aspect to it as well. So that's where that came in.
So fucking cool. Like all this stuff I'm finding out is so sick. Because that like kind of tied into a lot of the things early in book 2, but you know, he ends up going on to Darce onto the Grand Admiral's ship, and again, I don't think this is spoilery, but the whole purpose of the Sentinel is that they could have some sort of aspect of control over the seas, and they're tied into the captain of the ship. So whether it's not just the Grand Admiral, which is really cool, but I'm forgetting her name, and actually the name of her ship, where they use them almost as like a Han Solo-y type thing. If I'm tying it into Star Wars, it's their assistants on the other ship. But the whole idea of kind of having that magic tied into a captain, and you don't know when you're doing it, whether the captain is going to be good, bad, or somewhere in between. And the Grand Admiral has an arsenal of Sentinels, which is very, very, very cool. what led you to having that aspect brought into the story? Because I feel like that definitely added into the kind of foreboding aspect of things, like where you start to see the Grand Admiral's sails, and you're like, it's not just him. Like, he's got 15 Darces on there.
Yeah. So I always really liked the idea. I mean, I think it's quite common in a lot of fantasy, but the idea of like magic being sort of powered or in place because of some sort of like blood bond between two people. So I always wanted that to be an aspect of it. And a lot of the times, you know, that blood bond is like kind of a soulmate thing. It's a positive thing. But what was really interesting and fun to explore with the Grand Admiral's side of things is that is absolutely not the case. I'll not name his old Sentinel because that's a little bit of a spoiler as well. But the fact that his Sentinel, they went their separate ways. They like could not function together as that sort of pairing anymore. So instead, because he doesn't have his own personal Sentinel, he then uses various means to control others and kind of just harness their power. But are they ever really loyal to him, or has he just kind of got a sword hanging over their head? So that was really, really fun to sort of dive into. You've got like one example, like Nishi and Kerr on the Jade Dawn, like they have a really nice sentinel bond, like they're so close. He knows what she's thinking, and vice versa, and they just work so well as a team, and they're equals. And then you've got, on the other hand, the Grand Admiral, who is just using fear and kind of power to control his sentinels. So that was a really fun dynamic to explore on both sides.
Yes, Jade Dawn was the ship that I could not think of. Thank you. That would have driven me nuts. I would have just ran to the Kindle as soon as this was done and like spliced in me saying it in the middle. But yes, and it's like you said, those two had a almost such a good bond that he was acting while she was thinking, and you know, the banter between them, you could tell that was much more of a symbiotic relationship between the two of them, where it's like we work together in tandem to keep things up and running. And the Grand Admiral was like, he appears and people eyes down, like heads tilting away, walking past, and again, avoiding all spoilers at all costs, but the initial breakup between him and that Sentinel that you mentioned really kind of set the story in motion before we even get into the story. What led to that backstory? Because it directly kind of influences Isla's story and Darce. Everyone's is almost the push-off point between what happened with those two, which we don't even find out about until towards the end of book 2, if I remember correctly. What went into making that backstory and it, and you know, kind of building it up to have such an impact on the present day?
Yeah. Again, that was something that I didn't know initially when I was planning book 1, and then when I was kind of like started to develop the relationship between the characters, it was just sort of an idea that came into my head, and it's almost like, oh, you know, how can I make this even more sort of heart-wrenching and tragic and like involved in the lives of the characters that are currently going through like the conflict at the moment. And I think a lot of the kind of themes of the book, or the themes of the series, are to do with sort of the past and that kind of generational trauma and things that happen to your parents, your ancestors, that the hurt and the pain of that then just kind of carries down. So I think that was a kind of connection to that, in the sense that, you know, this all happened way before the story even started, but it's still having a kind of tangible influence on it as it happens.
That's a very interesting to hear you say that as one of the main themes to the story, the generational trauma of everything, because we kind of see in the world today where people are still, you know, hating other people and engaging in fighting, all this type of stuff, and it's like, what made you dislike them? And it's like, well, my great grandfather, like, people are fighting for generations at this point. But
yeah,
you know, that aspect, as it turns out, is really never going to resolve the current conflict of what's going on, whether it's in real life or in the story. So I feel like having Isla, again, pivoting, no spoileries, but at her POV in this story, she pivots and goes to the Selkie homeland. And the way that she is treated there is almost kind of trying to prove herself to be like, we can get past this. I'm trying to kind of build that bond between both of us, the humans and the Selkies, and, you know, bring aspects together of both sides to heal and move on. What made you want to explore that route for her story, especially with all of the Selkie elders that she's around in that story? She is with no other humans for a lot of the story. So what made you want to go that route?
Yeah, I think from the very first page of Sea of Souls is what you learn about. The first thing you learn about Isla is that she just doesn't feel like she belongs anywhere. So that idea of belonging is essentially like the number one thing that drives her throughout all three books. That wanting to belong somewhere, but never quite feeling like she does. And that's why she, you know, left in the first place. So when she's coming back after 7 years away at sea, it's because she left to try and find that thing that she was missing. She never did. She comes back. She still can't find it at home. And then even by the end of book one and then into book two, where she goes to the Selkies and is hoping to find belonging there, she kind of realizes that this isn't necessarily all she would thought it would be either. So it's a real sort of, there was obviously like a big plot and lots of, you know, stuff going on in terms of the island and the Selkies and the humans and that conflict. But I would say the thing that drives the story probably first and foremost is that personal journey for Isla, navigating all the relationships that she has with different people and different sort of factions, and really trying to get to the heart of where she feels that she belongs.
Mm-hmm. It's really interesting to hear that, and it almost reminded me of, and it's so much more like well done than like Avatar or like Pocahontas, that type of thing, where it's one person who goes into a culture completely unknown to them, and they start, you know, learning the different traditions and the cultural values and all this type of stuff. And like you said, it's her trying to find a place where she belongs, but the story is much deeper for her because of the power that she almost ends up having, where she's learning how to, you know, dream walk, I think it's called, or if I got that wrong, maybe dream swim because it's in the ocean. But one of those aspects. But what made you want to explore that route of having her be important to both races and have that ability? Because it ends up where she has to use this ability that she kind of has lurking under her personality, and especially once she gets her pelt, which again, I'm not going into anything about the pelt, but when she gets it, that is something that she has to master in order to, you know, transcend and take the next step towards this process that she has to go through. But I feel like that ability that she has to kind of conquer and master was very unique and very cool. What went into that, and how'd you come up with the idea of this being something that she has to control to, you know, help evolve the story?
I guess it kind of ties into everything we were just talking about. So that idea of belonging first and foremost, and then that idea of that kind of generational conflict and the hurt, and the pain, and trying to navigate past that. So with the Dreamwalker pelt and with her dreamwalking ability, she can go into the memories of her ancestors. So she can see things that have happened, kind of terrible things, but also good things that have happened, and kind of experience that as if she was there. So I think in terms of a character to try and understand, you know, how this did all happen, is there ever going to be any hope for these two sides to understand each other? Well, if there is, it has to be someone that can almost go back in time and live those memories and take them all in and see if there is a way to kind of move past the mistakes that have been made before, and making sure that those cycles of violence don't keep continuing. So I've always really just been fascinated by like memory as a sort of, you know, concept. So the idea of kind of going back through old memories and experiencing them and living them and seeing if you can learn from them, I suppose, which is, you know, again, talking about kind of present day things. If we're never learning from mistakes, then the same thing's going to keep happening again and again. So yeah, I thought that was really, really interesting.
Yeah, it was very interesting. And I thought it was very cool that she's trying to gain this ability and do this to, you know, the benefit of really humans and Selkies. And on both sides of it, none of them want it to happen. The Selkies want it to happen a little bit more. They're teaching her to do it, but it's almost like, I need help to do this. And some of the elders are just like, you're not one of us. Like, I don't even care if you know how to do it. And it's like, they're so embedded in like that hatred and fighting against each other, where someone is like, let me help heal both of us. And, you know, well, then we could start moving on. And they're like, no, we don't want that. It was a very interesting.
You have to want to change. Like you can't force them to change. They have to want it as well. So yeah, it's about kind of trying to get to that point.
Mm-hmm. And another very good comment coming in: dreamwalking sounds like an amazing way to explore characters' heritage, which it absolutely was. Was that something that you set out to do with it as well? Because she kind of dives deep. I'm really making a lot of terrible C puns unintentionally, but she dives deep into the lore of the Selkies while doing it, giving us as the reader such a unique experience to learn about it along with her.
Yeah, and I think for her as well, like I said, with her not having that sense of belonging, it's a way to explore part of herself that was kind of like taken from her, kind of stolen from her. She never got the chance to understand that side of herself. And there's a lot of questions that she has always wanted answers to. Again, going right back to the beginning of Sea of Souls, it's a letter from her mother that brings her back, kind of promising answers to questions that she's always had. So being able to do the dream walking and going back into those memories and finding out more about her past. Some stuff she probably would have preferred not to know about. But yeah, it's just a way for her to then come to terms with how she is, who she is, and the events that kind of led to that.
And it was very cool to have that happen, because it was almost a similar jump off point in one of the Game of Thrones storylines, where when Jon and Ned Stark are leaving each other, and he goes, "I'll tell you all about your mother when we get back." And like, it kind of was just like, "Oh shit!" Like uh-oh. It's very funny that you know, in both aspects of things, it's you know, I'll tell you about your mother or your history when we reconnect and everything. But
and then it kind of happens twice as well, because then when she goes to the city, she meets her uncle, and he clearly knows about what's going on, and then he refuses to tell her as well, and then that's just all more frustration. She's already missed the chance to ask her mother the questions, now her uncle's refusing to tell her, and it's just this like, why won't anyone tell me like who I am and where I belong? So
yeah, and I feel like even outside of Isla's story, her brother Lachlan is one of a very underrated character in this, because he has his own trials and tribulations he goes through. And I mentioned a couple of times now, I feel like the character work in this story is top notch and really what connects to the reader especially. But in his storyline, he starts dealing with a lot more of the nobility and the higher ups of, you know, the admiralty without being the grand admiral, but all of these people, and he's trying to find a balance to walk between his uncle, between his sister, between Darce, all of these people. And one of the things that almost kind of goes by the wayside in my mind, not in a bad way, but it's kind of funny that the storylines in the city of what's going on, it's so divided. And while we're reading the two POVs of, you know, Darce being a good guy, trying to, you know, again, no spoilers, but his POV and hers, her brother is dealing with kind of like that built-in racism against the Selkies in the human cities. Was that something you kind of wanted to explore, where, you know, the two main storylines are let us help, let us heal, and then whenever her brother is involved, not every time, but you kind of get to see what the humans are thinking of the Selkies. It's all bloodthirsty. It's that. But is that something you wanted to explore?
And I think with him in particular, it's funny because like probably the number one comment from my critique partners when they were going through it was like Lachlan, you little shit, because he is another character that just makes decisions that make you want to wring his neck. Like he's got prejudices, like, and he's got, you know, he has his own trauma, obviously from what Selkies did to his family, but he can't let go of that, and then that kind of, you know, embitters him and kind of turns him into a version of himself that he probably never thought he'd be and never wanted to be. And he's got all this Admiralty influences around him that's sort of taken him further and further down that hole. And then you've got Darce, who's kind of trying to pull him back the way towards his sister, who he obviously has really conflicted feelings about as well. So it's almost about that. He's kind of he's a young character as well. He's still only in his early 20s. He's lost both his parents, and he's holding on to a lot of anger and a lot of hate, and he's getting pulled in one direction, and then Darce is obviously trying to pull him back. So I thought that kind of tug of war with him, and just willing him to make the right decisions, but not letting it be easy, because that kind of thing isn't easy, and he is going to make mistakes, and he's going to do not very nice things until hopefully at some point he does realize that he needs to kind of stop.
Yeah. Hopefully that redemption arc is coming in the second half of book 3. Lachlan, Lord of Poor Decisions, but I love him. And that is a perfect description of him, because as you're reading it, you're like, I know you're not a bad guy. Like, just don't do that. You did it. It was very funny to have that kind of split personality between them, because like you could tell when he's talking to Darce and other people, it's almost like, I know what the right thing is, but these people did this, and you're like, well, I kind of get it. Like, it was a very fine line that you put us in listening about him, because you're like, kind of get it, but then on the other side you're like, yeah, but for the greater good, like we could do this. So that's why I thought it was very well done. With that aspect of things. I am not going to spoiler anything, like I said, but again, Tides of Torment coming out in 2 days. So now that this is done, I'm always curious, do you guys as authors, as soon as the trilogy is done, is there something else percolating in there already written out as it's happening? Or do you kind of like to take like a little break and be like, let's see how this goes, I'm going to relax for a little, unwind? Or are you already working on the next thing?
Yeah, I'm already 20,000 words into my next book. So. Yeah, can't relax. The longest I've taken actually between sort of writing is between book 1 and 2 of Sea of Souls. That's probably the longest I've gone between releases, and it wasn't really a conscious thing. I just kind of got stuck. I got a bit burned out. It was all getting a bit too much, and then once I'd stopped for a while, I found it really hard to then start going again. So after that, when I got back into the swing of things, I just wanted to make sure just to keep going, even if I'm not writing loads and it's only like a couple hundred words a day, or even being able to write a few times a week, at least I'm kind of got that momentum. Whereas when I did take a break before, it was probably needed at the time, but then I found it really, really hard to kind of get back into the swing of things. So yeah, I am working on something new, and again, it's another genre change, which I've gone from sci-fi to fantasy, and now I'm it's still kind of fantasy adjacent. So dipping my toes into a bit of gothic horror next. So I'm planning on this probably being a standalone, which is a bit of a departure for me as well. So it's just going to be one kind of self-contained story, and then we'll see what's next.
Awesome. Gothic. That sounds very awesome. And I feel like it kind of goes very well with your writing style. I always like to ask this because your book, it felt like reading song lyrics, where everything flowed so nicely. Every sentence, not even paragraph, but everything felt so well done and pieced together. I love asking this because I am such a non-creative person that it blows my mind. But when you write something, and I have the Kindle version, so I see everyone's highlights like all over the place. When you write something, do you realize kind of right away, nailed that? Like whether it's a line, a sentence, a paragraph, or does it take someone beta reading or getting feedback, and then you kind of are like, all right, that was well done, or do you know right away, like,
yeah, I think kind of like if I get a line that kind of hits the way I'm like, oh yeah, that was a good line. That's definitely staying in there. Yeah, and obviously you can't make every line like that because it wouldn't have the impact. But every so often you kind of get to a point, whether it's a line in dialogue or a bit of description or just like a character's reflection, and as soon as you've written it, you just know that that's a good one that's going to kind of hit home. So that's always a really, really nice feeling to get as a writer.
Yeah, I imagine it must be. And then especially I see, like I said, you get to see the highlights of what other people think, and it's almost like I get annoyed when I'm not one of the first people to read it because I see it and I'm like, oh, I'm not. And it's like 37 highlights. I'm like, oh, okay. So that wasn't just me who loved that line then. Before ending, I always like to ask, what other things do you like to do outside of writing? Because it's very clear, that you kind of took inspiration from your background and your country, the heritage and everything. And like I said, we're on social media. I see like you hiking and exploring, doing that type of thing. But what do you like to do outside of, just being strictly creative as far as writing goes?
I have like a really weird, eclectic mix of things I like to do, which I think is good because, sometimes if you want to switch off, there's not just one thing that'll help. So like you said, yeah, I like to kind of get outdoors where possible, weather permitting. In Scotland at this time of year, it's a bit tougher. But yeah, I like video games has always been a big kind of part of sort of influence as well. Like really like the Mass Effect games, Dragon Age kind of RPGs and that. Anything with a story that I can kind of get stuck into is always good. But then yeah, I have really like other weird interests. Like I really like musical theatre. I like rugby. So I was just at the rugby at the weekend there, which was I think it's having something really different to do that's not kind of sitting at a computer. That either gets you outside or gets you like watching sport or something that's just completely different that you can switch off and relax is quite important. So you're not constantly in that kind of always on sort of mindset.
Yeah, for sure. Do you have a favorite rugby team? Because my favorite football team sucks. So I may join your fandom if possible. Is it leagues over there or is it more like a club type thing?
Yeah, so I mean, with rugby, kind of international's the biggest sort of stage. So I was at the Scotland New Zealand game at the weekend, which ended in glorious defeat. But then yeah, club wise, I've lived just outside of Edinburgh, and Edinburgh have a club, so get along, go to see them as well.
I'm going to now. The next time we talk, I'm going to know all of the players' histories. You're going to be like, all right, this was in depth, but that's very cool. I didn't play because I would have gotten murdered, but a lot of my friends in college were on the rugby team, so that was always fun to like go tailgate and watch them play. Very fun sport. I would die, but it's very cool. But yeah, I really had a great time today. This was exactly what I needed. I have a very busy thing going on at work right now, so hanging out with you and talking about all this was really awesome. And just congratulations on book 3 coming out in 2 days, November 12th. And it, like I said, it kind of is flying under the radar, this series, but the more, I guess, it got closer to book 3 release date, you're seeing more and more people say, hey, this ruled. Like, this is showing up on a lot, like, that's the first half of the year. I know Sea of Souls was on mine in, like, July, and it'll be on in December, but this is a great series that I feel like got better with each book. So it's definitely something very much to be proud of, and I just wanted to congratulate you on that.
Thank you so much.
And yeah, whenever you feel like coming back on, open invite.
Absolutely. No, I've had a great time. It's always just fun just to get chatting. So no, thank you very much for having me.
No, of course. And where can people find you and purchase the book?
Yeah, so my website is just ncscrimgeour.com, and then I'm on most kind of social media at Scrimscribes. And the book's available. It's on Kindle Unlimited, but then the physical copies are available most kind of online book retailers as well.
So everyone go and do that because it's something you don't want to miss out on. This is one of, like I said, one of the indie trilogies that I think are going to end up being all-timers. There's a couple of them that, kind of float up to the top for me. I'm really bad with C puns. It just happens. I never realized how popular it was.
How many C puns that you've managed to squeeze in?
Unintentionally, it just happened. But the trilogy itself is fantastic, and I feel like it's going to be one of the benchmarks that I'm going to be comparing other ones to going forwards, because each book, like you said, better and better, and I feel like you did a great job with it. So really just great work, and I hope the release date keeps blowing up for you, and and everyone in the chat, I'm sure, will be looking forward to what comes next. So congratulations again.
Thanks again.
And thank you everyone in the chat for joining. Have a good rest of your guys' days and evening. Please have a glass of wine or something for me as I go back to work. Do something, for the love of God, help me. But have a good rest of your day, everyone. And I will see you in, I think, like a week and a half for the next episode. But thank you for joining today. I really appreciate it.